Hey, what's up, fight fans? Well, back once again for another fight card prediction. We've had a little break, which was nice. It was nice to not watch any fights for the 4 or 5 days, and then over the weekend I managed to get back into it. But we're back here again for UFC London, for Werdum versus Volkov from the O2 Arena down in London, which it's the yearly stopover here to London with the cards, which I don't think are overly great. I think, like I've said in social media before, I think the London crowds, especially the arena like the O2, deserves bigger fights, but they keep selling out. So as long as they keep selling out, they're going to keep bringing cards which are not overly great, but there is some interesting stylistic matchups I am looking forward to seeing in this fight, and there is fighters I am looking forward to seeing as well. After this one, we have a 3-week break. UFC 223 will be the next card. It's an unbelievable card. We've got a run of cards through April into May, which is fantastic. So I'm actually looking forward to this break, getting this event out the road, having a break for a few weeks, not watching any tape. Well, that's a lie. I probably will be watching tape. I'll be watching 3 fights at a time and breaking that down over a number of days and taking notes and so on. And then we've got like Gaethje and Poirier, and then it moves on to Atlantic City, which is a great card filled with many good fights. So overall, looking forward to kind of getting this card out the road. It's a card I won't even be watching live because I'll be working. I'm working till late Saturday night, so as soon as I finish work, I'll come home and watch the card. 3 Scotsmen fighting in the card, so that's obviously piqued my interest there. Having local fighters that I know personally, and I have watched for a very, very long time as well. So looking forward to seeing those guys fight. And for Werdum, I mean, he's fought a lot of times over here in the UK, so it'd be nice to kind of see him again for Werdum 2.0 with striking. Back in the day, didn't really have that. So yeah, getting into it, we're going to start off down in there. I think this is the normal order we're going to go on for this fight card. So it's starting off in the lightweight division with Kajan Johnson facing off against Stevie Ray. 2 guys who are a little bit familiar with each other. They both trained and sparred together at TriStar when Stevie Ray used to make the annual trip out there a few years back. And from all intents and purposes, they used to have really good sessions together, and just guys that they kind of know a little bit about each other. So that's always interesting when you come into a fight like this. Kajan Johnson's coming off a knockout of Adriano Martins. I put that more down to Adriano Martins. I thought Kajan Johnson didn't do much in that fight, but Adriano Martins did even less. And the one time he did do something, he got caught with a big, big shot. His wins in the UFC, like Naoki Katani was one of them. Weiping Zhang was another one. So his wins in the UFC are not over really good guys. I like Martins as a fighter. I think he's been cut from the UFC since, but he did nothing in that fight. And Kajan Johnson was literally on his bike the entire fight, really not throwing a hell of a lot of output, and it was just a really bad fight overall to watch, if being honest. Stevie Ray, it was uncertain whether he was going to re-sign with the UFC. There was a lot of things. I think he went into that fight with Paul Felder back in Glasgow. He put it in the line. If he win that fight, he was going to get himself a bigger contract, which was obviously going to benefit him and his family and so on. And he ran the risk of going into that fight without signing a new contract and paid the price for it. And it was like the reception Stevie got home for that fight was unbelievable. I think Paul Felder's in a really good spot the minute he ran into a guy who hits very hard, and he did get brutalised with some massive ground and pound to get stopped in that one. Signed with Ali Abdelaziz, which was a little bit of a surprise. He got him re-signed with the UFC and got himself a fight in here. I think when someone fell out, I can't remember who fell out of this one, but Stevie put his name forward to get in here, and he got the opportunity to come in and fight in this card here. So also like the fact that, well, he's opened his own gym, so he's been keeping busy, he's been keeping sharp. I know he's been going to the Dinky Ninjas, or a higher level MMA I should say, training with like Danny Henry and so on, who's also fighting in this card. For me, when I look at them, I think that Stevie has more tools. I think he is more accurate striker. I think he's definitely got the better wrestling, and he can control the fight if it goes to the ground. That being said, he's coming off a pretty devastating loss in Glasgow. Took some big hits in that one, and he's taken the right amount of time off. It's like 9 months, 10 months since that fight. So not as long as that, but 7-8 months. He's taken a long time off. He's anxious to get back in there again, but he is coming off a big fight where he got hurt in that one. I like Stevie Ray, I think he's a little bit more of a better all-around mixed martial artist, and as long as he doesn't get caught with that big shot that can buckle his knees a little bit, I think he can win the fight. He can get takedowns, he's got heavy ground and pound, underrated submission skills as well, and good control on top, and that's kind of how I'm seeing this here, is him hitting at distance, somehow getting a clinch, getting a takedown, going to the ground and winning that through there. So I'm going to pick him to win via decision in that one there. This is the fight that literally just got announced in the last hour, and I'm actually watching, not really watching, but I've got his fights on in the background here. We've got the UFC debut of Narimani as he faces off against Nasrat, Haqparast. Narimani, like I say, I'm watching the Paddy Pimblett fight from Cage Warriors, where he won the Cage Warriors featherweight championship in that fight in Paddy's hometown of Liverpool, and beat kind of one of the guys who has been coming through the ranks here in the UK, and is a guy that's heavily touted, and won the fight pretty convincingly, being honest. So Narimani is kind of like a wrestler boxer, fairly decent, fairly technical on the feet, doesn't really jump off the scales with anything with his game, but he's a solid professional, and he only loses really kind of close fights. He lost to Alex Enland, who did sign for the UFC, never fought for them, and Graham Turner, which is a Scots guy I know through the scene up here, and that was very close fight in that one. The split decision, he could have went either way in that one. Like I say, a solid all around guy, decent boxing, decent wrestling, and that's two pretty decent things to have, but nothing really stands out as that, like, oh, that's his go-to thing. Nasrat Haqparast, he's coming off his UFC loss to Marshman. I think it's fairly clear to see that this guy is a striker, and a heavy striker as well. He dropped Marcin Held in that fight with a beautiful combination. He's got a really big violent left hand that he throws in many combinations and can hit you with there. I think he came in short notice, and once he started to gas, Marcin Held did what Marcin Held usually does, and it's take the fight to the ground. I thought he did alright with his submission defense, because Marcin did get him in some hairy spots in that one. The way I kind of see this fight going is more or less it being a striking fight. I think if Narimani wants to win the fight, he should try and use his wrestling like we saw in the Held fight. You can get this guy to the ground and control him down there. He always continues to fight, and sometimes he found his way back to his feet on a couple of occasions in that fight, but that's where I think Narimani should maybe try and go after Haqparast a little bit, because I think Haqparast hits harder, but Narimani is one of those guys who's always on his feet, he's always moving, he's always in the go. He's been 5 rounds, and he's got a fairly decent gas tank. One thing that's kind of thrown me off with Narimani is, I think 2 weeks ago I read somewhere that he was thinking about retiring from the sport. He's only like 27, 28, maybe 29 in that region, so that was a little bit of a red flag there, but he's getting his opportunity in the UFC here, obviously fighting up a division at 155. Haqparast will be the bigger guy, you would think. So if I'm seeing a striking battle, I'm going to go with Haqparast. I think that he hits harder. He could hurt Narimani a little bit, but Narimani's a tough guy to put out. So I'm going to go Haqparast via decision. Can't say I'm overly confident, because I know what Narimani brings to the table and is a really solid all-around fighter. But I'm going to go Nasrat Haqparast to win via decision there. Heavyweight division, Mark Godbeer faces off against Dmitriy Sosnovskiy. One of these kind of fights in the heavyweight division which really mean very little. I'm watching a couple of fights back of Dmitriy Sosnovskiy. He's a guy he hasn't fought all that often in the last 5 years. He's been signed to the UFC for a long time. Out in the regionals, the guy looked absolutely jacked. So I've got a kind of feeling that Dmitriy, maybe he came into the UFC and he maybe realised that he couldn't be on some of the supplements and so on, that he was going to get away with in the UFC with USADA and so on. So that's kind of where I'm thinking this fight, why he hasn't fought in the UFC, is that he's maybe just looking after himself a little bit better and not trying to get caught out, which I got a funny feeling it might be the case. when I look at him, his fighting skills, very little on the feet. Just burrows forward, throws punches to get into a clinch and initiate a takedown. He beat Alexander Emelianenko via that. He just kind of bull rushed him through strikes, got him against the cage, managed to get a takedown. Once he gets a takedown, he's a really tough guy to get off you. I saw that in the Oleg, I think it's Gapchenko fight. Once he gets any semblance of side control or a chance to get to mount, this guy just rains bombs. And Emelianenko tapped out. Gapchenko got stopped very, very early, but like I say, the guy hasn't fought a hell of a lot in the last 4 or 5 years, so who knows what's going on there. Mark Godbeer, I think for the last 9 weeks he's been out in Thailand, which kind of worries me a little bit because he should probably be training for a grappler, and that's something that's always been a little bit of his Achilles heel, is his grappling. He got subbed by Justin Ledet, who's not known as a guy to sub other fighters. He's predominantly a boxer and a fairly decent one at that, and he got tapped in his UFC debut. There was the whole Walt Harris incident, where he won that one via legal DQ. He won the Daniel Spitz fight, which was very close. It's all about who lands first. I think if Mark Godbeer, he has got the advantage on the feet. I think he's got more power. But I think that Dmitriy Sosnovskiy has got a big advantage on the ground if he can take it there. And that's kind of where I see this fight going. I see him burling forward. He has to be careful he doesn't get hit with a shot by Mark Godbeer. So the kind of way I see this fight going is Sosnovskiy getting the fight to the ground and stopping him via ground and pound. So I'm going to go maybe a late first round. In fact, I'm going to go early second round. TKO stoppage for Sosnovskiy there. But like I say, it's hard to be confident because the guy barely fights, and it's hard to just try to look for information on him. It's I was trying to find out why he was out so long, but it's hard to. I kind of made my own assumptions with the whole USADA thing, possibly. But I'm going to go Sosnovskiy. Round 2 TKO victory there. Light heavyweight division. The Beardew Paul Craig faces off against Magomed Ankalaev. This was the first fight that was made for UFC London way back in November, I believe it was. And I heard that Ankalaev had signed with the UFC. So I was going to go and watch his fights there, and I thought, well, there's not much point because the fights are like 4 months away. So I didn't do it. This week, the first fighter that I wanted to watch was this guy from Russia. Those guys always intrigue me to watch, especially guys at a heavier weight divisions like 205 and heavyweight and so on. And this guy's impressive. I like what I see out of this guy. I think this guy is a future potential top 5 guy. Love what I see. Heavy hands, decent knees in the clinch, massive ground and pound. I mean, one of the fights, I think it was the Silva fight, he was placed up against the cage and he griped the right leg of the Silva and like ripped it out from underneath him. Got into a ground and pound situation. He kind of raised up raised up a little bit and just started throwing bombs, and one shot and he was done. He did the exact same in the Wagner Prado fight. He kind of got back to his kind of knees a little bit and just absolutely unloaded with massive ground and pound. And that was scary to see. You don't see too many guys with that, where they just kind of raise themselves up and just throw leather and knock guys out with heavy ground and pound. That was impressive to me. I think he's a really decent striker. I think he's got really nice leg kicks. I think he attacks the body really well. And he's got that very good time on a double leg takedown, and he's got the control on the ground over his opponents. I think this is a horrible matchup for Paul Craig, and this is I think Paul Craig could see his walking papers after this one. It pains me to say it, but I think he's going to get absolutely obliterated in this fight. I think that coming off those losses to Tyson Pedro, Khalil Roundtree, where he didn't look good in those fights at all, his striking's got a lot to be desired. His jiu-jitsu is very dangerous. Now that's where Ankalaev needs to be careful, because if he, like you seen in the Carl Moore fight, I thought he was losing that Carl Moore fight, and then he catches a submission out of nowhere. He is very dangerous, so if he goes to the ground he has to watch his P's and Q's down there, because Paul Craig could catch him with a submission. I just don't think he's going to do it. I think Magomed's going to stop him. He's going to stop him early. So I'm going to go Magomed Ankalaev via a first round TKO via ground and pound. I think at some point this fight just gets finished, and Magomed is going to probably be my most confident pick of the entire card here. So Magomed for the win there. Moving on to the featherweight division, another Scotsman who's fighting. Danny the Hatchet Henry faces off against a UFC newcomer in Hakeem Dawodu. Dawodu is a guy I've known about for 3-4 years. He come up through the Canadian scene, fought on World Series of Fights, and just a solid young fighter. A very green fighter, I still think. There's aspects to his game you can exploit, and someone like Danny Henry could exploit those aspects of Dawodu's game, like his overall game, that I think that he can improve on. Starting off with Danny Henry, I mean, that fight in Glasgow, I went back and watched it yesterday, and I forgot just how good a fight it really was. I remember being in the crowd, and it was a rough start for him. He was taking a lot of heavy shots, kind of getting chin checked a little bit. Tamer was finding his chin early and very, very often, and then he just started to turn it around. Literally in the middle of the fight, around the 3-minute mark of that second round, saying that, at the end of the first round, the last minute he started to get into the fight a little bit, and he got the jitters out the road going into the second round. Tamer started off fairly quick again with some leg kicks, but then he came in towards that fight, and he hurt him on the feet, took his back, and was maybe another 10-15 seconds he could have possibly tapped him out. And then in the third round he really just dominated him once Tamer started to gas himself. He was pretty gassed out in the second round. In the third round he was non-existent, and Danny Henry won that fight, and he won himself a bonus out of it as well. Danny's a really soft-spoken guy, and just gets on with his work. And the one thing I like about what he's done is he's went and carved his career out there in South Africa, going to other guys' backyards, fighting at elevation, fighting tough guys over there in Africa in the UFC, and just quietly getting on with his business. That's what I like about Danny. That's what he does, and I think he's got a very good opportunity of beating Hakeem Dawodu here. Initially, when I first heard this fight, gut feeling was Hakeem. I must admit, when I go back and watch some of Danny's fights, he's hard to put away, and he's always there. The one thing that I like with Hakeem is the hand speed and the variety of his shot selection as well. One thing that did show out to me was the Steven Seiler fight, where he got his back taken. I think if Danny, that's somewhere where Danny needs to be looking to take this fight, is take it to the ground and look to try and submit this guy, because I think being the bigger guy, being like a really bigger guy over Hakeem here, he could do some damage by having him on his back or just being on top. Hard to keep Hakeem there. He finds a way to get back to his feet. Dawodu has been doing his camp over here, well, not over here, but in Ireland at SBG, which was a little bit of a weird one for me. But if he takes this fight 100% serious and stops all the... Sometimes he does some silly things in fights which I don't really agree with, like showboating a little bit. If he is 100% committed in this fight here, I think he could definitely pose Danny Henry problems. For me, I'm going to stick with my gut feeling, even though I've been going back and forward in this fight. I think Danny is a tough guy to face. He is dropping down his weight class he fought before he came into the UFC at 145. I thought he might have stayed at 155, because he is still a big dude at 155. I'm going to go Hakeem Dawodu, but I think if he doesn't get Danny out early, I think this could be a very, very tough fight late on. So I've got Hakeem via split decision here. Obviously, I would like Danny Henry to win because he's a guy that literally lives minutes away from where I am. I've seen him a few times in recent months, out and about. So he lives round about where I am. So yeah, I hope he wins. I think he's just got a tough matchup here. I wish you all the best, Danny, but I'm going to pick Hakeem Dawodu via a very close split decision there. Welterweight division. Weird fight. Jack Marshman against Brad Scott. Not in a weird fight as in both guys facing each other. It's a weird fight that it's taking place at 170 and both guys are making the drop down to that division there. So Jack Marshman, he just kind of got totally outclassed by Antonio Carlos Jr. on the ground. He is predominantly a very, very good, accurate boxer, a very good striker with big power. How will that translate down to 170? I think it will translate very well. I don't think he was ever the biggest. He was never really the biggest 185er. So you've seen that in the Seidenblad fight. He was like dwarfed by Seidenblad, and he still found a way to stop that fight. Brad Scott, very tough guy. He's been in the UFC, kind of traded wins and losses. Trains out at the MMA lab. I think he's been in Thailand for a long time as well, especially coming up to this fight here. I think Jack Marshman is just I think if it goes to the ground, Brad Scott will have an advantage. I think on the feet, Jack Marshman has the better boxing credentials, the better striking credentials, and he has, I think, good fast hands. I think he has good movement with his feet. I think it's all about the cut for these two. You need to watch these guys on Friday when they're dropping that weight and seeing how they both look. If they both look depleted or one looks good and another doesn't. Personally, for me, I like Jack Marshman. I think he's the better striker. I think that's where this fight's going to take place. And for me, if it takes place on the feet, I think he's just a crisper, better boxer. And could maybe get Brad Scott out of there. I think it's a hard one because Brad Scott, I think his last fight against Jack Marshman was the only time he was stopped in the UFC, if I remember right off the top of my head. So I'm going to pick Jack Marshman via decision. Could potentially get a stoppage, but I like Marshman to win the fight here. Staying in the welterweight division, we have Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts against Oliver Enkamp. Enkamp, he actually impressed me in his UFC debut against Nordin Taleb. It was Taleb's a hard guy to face, and it's a mutual opponent of both guys here. And he was dangerous. He looked dangerous. He looked like a young guy. I think there was a lot of holes in his game. You could definitely see that. But he was a switch stance fighter, threw a lot of like fancy kicks. I think that's something that he needs to rein back and not do so much of that and kind of conserve his energy and mix up a little bit. He was just throwing naked kicks, which is against someone like Nordin Taleb who's been around for a long time. You're not going to catch a guy, especially a guy come from TriStar, who'll be very defensive minded and being very, very good at the defensive aspects of MMA. I think that it was just a little bit wasted energy, which I don't think he should be doing. He's been kind of travelling all over the place. He's been in Thailand as well. He's been at the Syndicate MMA in Vegas. He's been at the UFC PI Centre. So he's been away getting better, I would think, before coming back to his little team over there in Sweden. Danny Roberts. This fight kind of interests me for the fact that he got knocked out pretty brutally against Nordin Taleb, like I mentioned before with Enkamp. He's a guy... really good boxer. I think he's got a little bit of a chin issue, but I think he can definitely deliver some big power shots himself. I think one of the things that he could do in this fight, and he's did in previous fights before the UFC, is his grappling. He can wrestle, and that's something I think he can use here against a guy who's predominantly just going to want to strike. I don't see him mixing it up and wanting to take this fight to the ground. So hopefully Danny mixes it up a little bit. I think he is the better boxer. I think he's the more accurate striker, but he has to be careful of those wild shots that Oliver Enkamp is going to throw. But it's a tough fight for Danny Roberts, I think, because he's coming back after that knockout, and it's 4 months ago. So has he taken enough time off? Who knows? I just think Danny Roberts has got that a little bit too much experience in the cage, in Cage Warriors, in the UFC over this guy. As long as he doesn't get caught, and I think he mixes it up, I think he wins the fight. I would like him to win the fight. I am a fan of Danny Roberts. So I'm going to pick Danny Roberts. I think it's going to have to be another decision, actually. Yeah, I'm going to pick another decision win there for Danny Roberts, because not unless he catches him clean with a shot like he did against Bobby Nash, which was phenomenal. I don't see him stopping Enkamp. So I'm going to go Danny Roberts for a decision there. Moving on, middleweight division, the UFC debut of the White Mike Tyson, John Phillips. If you're watching MMA Hour 6-7 hours ago, this guy was on there. He's a guy that stays in the caravan in John Kavanagh's backyard. A guy we've known about in the UFC, the British kind of regional scene for a long time. Fights out of Wales. Obviously comes from SBG. That's his camp. Big power hitter, massive power hitter. He was the former Obama champion. And really, when you give yourself a name like the White Mike Tyson, you expect a lot of kind of power hitting from this guy, and he does deliver. The one thing that's been a little bit, he's had a couple of fights, UFC fights announced, and then he had to pull out for them. I think there's maybe visa issues, fighting in America and so on. It says injuries, but I don't really believe it was that. Sometimes he doesn't make weight and he misses badly. I mean, there was a fight, I think it was Andy Devent, he was supposed to face, and he came in 13 pounds over. That's not overly professional. So hopefully he's got his weight in check going to London this week, because he can't be doing shit like that in the UFC, because he won't be around that long if he's missing weight like that. He'll be made to move up to the 205 division. Big power hitter. The one thing I'm a little bit worried about, if he gets put in his back, which I think that he could be lacking a little bit down there. Charles Byrd, I think, is someone that wants he will want to take the fight down there. We've seen him the Dana White show, and I think that's where he predominantly will want. I don't think he'll want to strike with this guy, because Phillips does have massive power on both hands. It's a fight I've not looked into. It's one of the fights on here. It's probably the least one that I've looked into too much. I think it was just the last one that actually just kind of caught my eye a little bit. But I think John Phillips has enough on the feet to hurt this guy and put him down. But he has to be careful if it goes to the ground, which I think Charles Byrd will want to do. I'm going to pick John Phillips as a first round TKO. I think he catches him with those big shots and he puts him down, and he kind of lives up to his nickname there. But I do see problems going forward in that middleweight division, because it is a tough division to win consecutive fights in. So John Phillips for the victory, TKO in round number 1 there. Moving on to the UFC Fight Pass main card, starting off in the welterweight division with Leon Rocky Edwards against Peter Sobotta. Very surprised this matchup got put together, for the fact that I think Leon Edwards is a guy who probably deserved a better opponent, I think, than Peter Sobotta. Leon Edwards has some really stellar names in the win column in the UFC, and he's did it over a variety of different. He's did it by decision. He's submitted guys. He's knocked out guys really quick. So he's a dangerous guy and a very well-rounded guy, and that's something that I've noticed with his progression in the UFC, is just how good the guy is getting from fight to fight. And he's only lost in the UFC is to Kamaru Usman, who has put himself in title talk pretty much. He's in that top 10. He wins a fight or two, he might be fighting for a belt soon. Wins over like Brian Barberena, who's just tough. He did get hit in that one, so that somebody has to be careful with. Vicente Luque, I think, is a legit win. I really rate Vicente Luque a lot. Albert Tumanov at the time was a killer, and he stopped him in that fight, much to my surprise, being honest. And he's just a solid all-around professional, very quiet guy, not the kind of most fan-friendly guy, but he's a solid, well-rounded fighter. And I expected a bigger, better opponent than Peter Sobotta. I've never really been overly the biggest Peter Sobotta fan. I think he's a solid veteran fighter, fighting out of Germany. And it's something that I just think he's okay. I think he's dangerous on the ground. I think he trained a lot with Dean Lister. So his jiu-jitsu is very, very good. But his wins in the UFC, I mean, Powell Pollack was the guy that Leon Edwards beat. Steve Kennedy, Dalby I think is a good win, because I think Dalby's a tough guy. Ben Saunders, it's just, you can hit this guy, and that's what happened in that fight last May in Sweden. I just think this is a really good showcase fight for Leon Edwards, and he can really use that to his advantage in this fight here. I think he's going to be too fast. I think he's going to have faster hands. I think he can mix it up if he wants to. He has to be careful if he goes to the ground. I don't think he will. I think Leon Edwards could stop Peter Sobotta here, so I'm going to go that quick. And like Leon Edwards, just what I'm talking about, if you don't know, he's got a brother that's coming through, fights on BAM. I actually fought last week with an impressive finish after getting dropped, called Fabian Edwards. A guy you should maybe go and check out, because I think he will be in the UFC within the next couple of years at least. And really exciting prospect coming out of the UK here. But getting back to this fight, I like Leon Edwards here. I think he can stop Peter Sobotta, and I'm fairly confident he can win this fight. So Leon Edwards via a knockout. I'm going to go round number 2 there. Bantamweight division, we've got Tom Duquesnoy against Terrion Ware. Feel a little bit sorry for Terrion Ware getting all these kind of young prospects. I mean, he had Cody Stamen, which was a tough fight at like a week's notice. Sean O'Malley, I think, is a really good fighter. People talk some shit on him. I'm not that. I think Sean O'Malley's going to be a fun, exciting fighter that wins himself a lot of bonus money with the way he fights. And then he's got Tom Duquesnoy here, who is one of Europe's kind of darling fighters. He's a fighter that a lot of us are big fans. I'm a big fan. I'll put my hands up. I'm a massive fan of Tom Duquesnoy. Was very disappointed in that last fight. I think that Cody Stamann, not taking anything away from him, because he's a top 15 fighter now. He's just outside the top 10, and he's beaten good fighters. Tom Duquesnoy started very well. I thought he was leading it off really well with his strikes. Just got, as per usual with Tom Duquesnoy, he got hit with shots. And then he did kind of break a little bit. Cody Stamann broke him towards the end of that fight. Once he realised that he wasn't going to get him out of there, he couldn't hurt him or really even get to him. Cody Stamann kind of broke him, and Tom Duquesnoy kind of accepted that a little bit, which I didn't expect to see, because we've seen that in the past where fights have got a little bit close and he's managed to pull through, but that's that next level of fighter. I mean, the Phillips fight, he took some shots in that one. That's the one thing that stands out with Duquesnoy, is he takes a lot of shots, and as a young guy coming up in the sport, you need to rectify that really quickly, or you're going to be a punching bag very quick in the UFC. Terrion Ware, I think, is a really solid professional. People are banding about, oh, he's a jobber this, jobber that. I don't think he is. I just think he's a solid professional. The UFC kind of know what they're doing here. They're giving him another young guy to pretty much get a UFC win, but against a tough guy that I think it's very hard to stop. In saying that, I think that Tom Duquesnoy, he needs to get back onto that stage, and I think that the slow roll, maybe I was expecting a little bit too much too soon out of Tom Duquesnoy, maybe the other people were as well. But a big statement here would be Tom Duquesnoy to stop Terrion Ware. The thing with Duquesnoy, he uses all his limbs, his knees, his elbows, very vicious. Has to keep that chin tucked, because he does get hit with shots, and that's the one thing. If he was to get knocked out badly, I could see him in the future getting knocked out badly again. And in that division, you've got a lot of big power hitters, so he has to be careful with that. I like Tom Duquesnoy in this fight. People are just blindly writing off Terrion Ware. I'm picking Tom, and I'm very confident in that, but I'm not writing off Terrion Ware because he is a solid guy. I'm going to pick. Do I pick him via stoppage? No, I don't think I will, because Terrion Ware, like I say, he doesn't get stopped that often. Leandro Higo, I think, was the last guy to stop him off the top of my head. Tom Duquesnoy, you know what I am? I'm going to go a stoppage here. Third round TKO for the Fire Kid, Tom Duquesnoy. And the co-main event of the night, a rematch, which when I heard it, I was like, what the hell is going on here? Jimi Manuwa faces off against Jan Blachowicz, and if you've seen the first fight with these two, it was absolutely garbage. It was not a good fight. A lot of clinch, stalling against the cage from Manuwa, which surprised me a little bit. I thought that Blachowicz would be able to kind of change position and maybe do that to Manuwa. I was not expecting that really from Manuwa. And I think Manuwa went into that fight with an injury. I think it was a knee injury, so he had to kind of hide that a little bit in that fight. Since then, Jimi Manuwa, he's had impressive performances, but he's also had very disappointing performances as well, where he's got taken out very quickly. Obviously, the Rumble Johnson fight, it's hard facing a guy like Rumble. Simple, big, massive power. He had the biggest power in the division by far, and he got caught by Volkanovski. I think he was looking ahead to Daniel Cormier far too much in that fight, and I didn't like it. So hopefully he's a little bit more humble, and he settles in and works his way back up again. Obviously he's got big knockout power himself. We've seen that against Corey Anderson in London last year. We've seen that against Oven St. Preux in Manchester the year before that, in 2016, late 2016. But yeah, interesting matchup here. For me, it's a Daukaus fight. I like what I've seen from Jan Blachowicz in his last few fights. Even the fight against Alexander Gustafsson, who looked very rusty in that fight, but I thought he came out there and he gave his all. And looked to try and make a fight of it. Just the better calibre and the better IQ of that Alexander Gustafsson really came to the forefront in that fight. When Jan Blachowicz loses the fight, it's usually very terrible. Pat Cummins, Corey Anderson, I think there's another fight, the Jimi Manuwa fight, obviously, that's the one that's probably sticking in my head there. I'm going to go with Jan Blachowicz here. I'm seeing people really confident in Jimi Manuwa. He's fighting at home, so the pressure's on him here. And he has to rebound after that big loss to Volkan Ozdemir last summer. I just think that Blachowicz is a guy that you shouldn't really write off. A lot of people did that in the Devin Clark fight. They were like writing him off. And I was like, Devin Clark ain't shit. And Blachowicz, to his credit, is not the best fighter, but he's still a tough out against anybody, and he's hard to put away. You don't really put this guy away, so he's going to be in the fight, and he has some decent big power and some big shots. I don't think this fight will be like the first one where Jimmy's going to clinch. He's fighting at home. He needs an exciting fight in front of his friends and family. I firmly believe that, especially the fans. I don't see this fight looking like the first one. And I think that Jan Blachowicz could potentially catch Jimi Manuwa. So my kind of big dog play for this fight, for this card, is probably going to be Jan Blachowicz. I don't think he'll bet it, but I'm going to pick Jan Blachowicz with the upset here over Jimi Manuwa in his hometown via maybe a first round. I'm going to go a second round TQ victory there. Obviously, I would like Jimmy to win because he's a UK based guy, but just watching the fights back and what I'm seeing from Blachowicz, when he's got himself a little bit more confidence, and Jimmy might not know what's really going on at the minute. So Jan Blachowicz for me, round 2 TQ victory there. And the main event of the night, Fabricio Werdum against Alexander Drago Volkov. I've not been impressed with Alexander Volkov's UFC run. Still think he lost to Timothy Johnson. Fought Roy Nelson, who's a shell of him former self. I don't think he's that great a fighter anymore. And Stefan Struve, I think, is on his way out the sport personally. When I watched that fight back with Stefan Struve got some nice shots off, but I think Struve just quit in that fight, took too many shots, and just kind of looked for the door a little bit quick. And now he's getting a step up here against one of the best top 3 guys in the division without a doubt, and one of the best heavyweights we've ever had in the sport, in my opinion, in Fabricio Werdum, who's having to go back and beat all these kind of young guys coming through. I thought he looked very good against Tybura. I took a lot away from that fight from Tybura and Werdum personally, and like the 2.0 version of Werdum since he's come into UFC, added that striking. People don't want to go to the ground with this guy, plain and simple. They do not want to go there because the guy is legit, one of the best to ever do it down there, and it's deadly. With his striking, it's came on leaps and bounds, working with Rafael Cordeiro and fighting out at King's MMA. I just think he's better everywhere, as long as he doesn't fight stupid like he did against Stipe, where he rushed in and that was just so stupid, and got hit with a big shot. I don't think that Volkov has got the explosive power what Stipe can throw. I think he's an accumulation striker that can hit you from long distance. Obviously he's a big guy, but Stefan Struve did catch him with some big shots. I think that Werdum can catch him with big shots. So I can see this fight kind of going two ways. I can see Werdum kind of brutalising him a little bit, or I can see him pretty much being like the Tybura fight, where he's pushing up against the cage and really pot shotting and just landing more strikes and winning the rounds through that. I picked quite a lot of decisions in this card, so I'm going to go a submission. I'm going to go a stoppage in this one here. So I'm going to go for Fabricio Werdum, 4th round. I'm going to go a submission. I think he finds a way to get another submission on his record here and beat Alexander Volkov. So that's my picks for UFC London. Subscribe if you can, guys. We're on that mission to 2,000. Get there by the end of the year, which I think we're going to do, hopefully. Now we've got a 3-week break, so I will be back probably 3 weeks from tonight, breaking down the card that is UFC 223 from New York. Namajunas versus Jędrzejczyk 2, the rematch, and we have Khabib against Tony. I'm so hopeful that fight stays together. I'm just not even thinking about that fight until the fight week. Hopefully it takes place. So that's my picks here for this card. Enjoy the card this weekend if you're watching, if you're going to it. I know some of my buddies are as well. And I will see you all in 3 weeks' time for one of the biggest cards we've had this year, UFC 223, Khabib versus Tony. So until then, all the best, take care, and as always, enjoy the fights.